Okay, so the example I'm going to be talking about is going to be ice cream, but there's also an example. I'm just going to show you the kind of theoretical level, and if you want to look at the math that goes into each step, that's on page 847. There's a solution section that just kind of shows how you lay it out. But you've got 5 parts in the ABC. The 5th part I didn't put on here was analyzing it. You have to analyze what you've done here so it's beneficial. But what you're doing is breaking out your costs to an activity basis versus your standard basis or versus, hey, here's manufacturing overhead costs for the whole company. We don't care how they're broken out. This is saying we want to break out those overhead costs so that we can better evaluate how the product lines are doing. So first step, you first need to identify what your overhead costs are. And overhead costs are generally, what are they? Variable or fixed?
Okay, this is the problem. This is what I was talking about, that I don't get it. That I was having a hard time remembering about. I won't do it. Anyway, yeah. So do some depth for me on that.
So variable or fixed, guys, overhead costs.
Variable.
Both.
Oh, okay. Yeah. More fixed usually, right?
Okay, but what's the difference in variable and variable?
That was smart, Luke.
Just in examples.
The example that we did for the case for Denton, the group's called Denton Brass. Destin Brass was their labor and their materials were variable costs, and those were assigned to the product level. Their overhead costs were things like building, rent, insurance, all that stuff.
So direct versus indirect.
Yeah, direct versus indirect. Yeah, that's the one that you're confused on.
Yeah, that's
Direct
the one
versus
I'm
indirect.
confused about.
So
Okay,
direct versus indirect.
So direct costs are what?
Direct costs
The
are
variable.
Yeah, direct is variable.
Yeah.
Because they're direct to the product.
So that's the one that if they quit producing.
Yeah. Potatoes, salt, oil over there.
You said direct is variable, right? Direct is variable. And indirect is
Fixed cannot be direct, right? Wait, no, yeah.
No.
They probably could. In general, they're not.
Yeah, probably not.
Direct.
Okay, so direct
D-
costs.
Indirect
direct-
can't be variable, can it?
So-
Is that what I just said?
So direct.
Indirect could be variable too, because you have some costs that are indirect. But for the case, for his use cases, no. If it's indirect, just consider it fixed. Stat cost.
In that case, like the $900 for rent, that would be an indirect cost. Yeah, exactly.
So nothing. It's just back to what. So direct or just what it costs you to produce your product.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So how do you choose which one? Or do you choose?
Let me get it. So yeah, good question. So real quick, so variable versus fixed. Fixed is where your overhead costs are going to be. Your ice cream cone, that's a variable cost because it's got the cost of the cone, the ice cream, the mix-ins, all that stuff. Versus your factory is fixed. So we're really trying to identify what these fixed costs are. The next step is you break it into the different activities or the smaller parts. With Destin Brass, it was product lines that we broke it into. For this example, the ice cream example, we're breaking it into activities. So the activities are, you've got unit level, batch level, product, or facility. Is a good way that you can break it up in manufacturing. Unit is the actual ice cream, or they suggest gallons. We'll talk about that in a second. Batch is every time you make that one kind of ice cream, you're doing a batch run of it, and then you clean the machines and put a different product in. That's your batch. Product is costs that are assigned to the product level. So not necessarily creating a batch, but creating a product. So we'll go to the cost in a second. Facility is costs that are higher level, your CEO's salary, your insurance costs, things like that. So on the unit level, you need to think about things like electricity, if you can assign that per unit. The example in the ice cream did assign it per unit. And then machine maintenance. Machine maintenance, they're assigning it here because most machines, when you buy a machine, you're going to be told this has 10,000 hours of useful life on it. And the machines usually have a counter and it'll track down, hey, you've used 9,800 hours, you only have 200 left. So you can assign that individual usage down to the unit level. So that's why they put machine maintenance there. This unit cost does not include cones and ice cream because that's a variable cost. We're looking at just fixed overhead costs.
So on number 2, that's you're just purely fixed costs, break into activities.
Yep, and you're just breaking the activities. You're not breaking up costs yet. You're simply breaking up the activities.
In fixed costs.
Yep. So you would write down all the activities that are generating cost in your organization. You just make a big list, and then you're breaking them up into smaller sections that you could then use for cost basing. Batch level is every time you run a big batch of ice cream. So you've got the machine set up, the machine takedown, any inspections that are happening along the way. Product level is more of the taste tester guy, the guy that's mixing up the flavor for the first time and that's making changes. That's kind of your product engineering. Any marketing and sales costs that are assigned to that product, you can put there. Facility, we talk about building security, building level maintenance, CEO salary, those kind of things are facility costs. So the ice cream company just went through and listed all of their costs and then assigned them to either unit, batch, product, facility.
So we don't care at all about direct costs in this.
He might say direct costs. If he says direct costs, he's just talking about a variable. And yeah, in this case, for activity-based costing, you use it in the calculation, but it's not going to be any different than the variable or the direct costs for standard cost accounting. So yeah, you don't really care about it.
Okay, so what do we classify as variable costs then?
The cone, ice cream, anything that increases as production increases.
Okay.
So the third one, you're identifying the cost drivers. So this is simply saying, how are we going to peg the costs? So you can evaluate and say, okay, gallons, batches, ingredients. That's what they did for the ice cream. They said, okay, gallons would be attributed to the unit level because we don't, let's say that they're probably selling gallons. They're probably not, I mean, they're likely not having little kids come into the factory and they're handing a cone off the machine line. They're selling a gallon. So every gallon they produce would be considered a unit. Batches, of course, to the batch line. Ingredients would be assigned to the product line. And then facility would probably be some hierarchy, some overhead that you just split out evenly, however you do it. In the ice cream example, they just split those out evenly. Or they didn't even split them out, they just tag them on the bottom. But how you choose these is you just have to look at your system and say, how can we break up the activities for costing? So you've got these activity levels. If it's an airplane, you've got your airplanes. Well, the airplane's totally different.
They don't confuse me.
Yeah, it's bad.
Stick with ice cream.
Just ice cream. Gallons, batches, ingredients, fit, units, batches, products. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, do you use, in the calculation, do you use one of these?
You do.
Figure it out.
So,
And so
Mm-hmm.
I just struggle with which activity driver to choose, right?
Yeah.
That's my struggle.
the example on page
I'm with you there.
847 actually uses all of them.
Is it 847 or 827?
It's 847.
But you have to use it with the correlating
You do. So
product. So you can only use gallons for
Yeah.
units, and you can only use batches for batches.
the ice cream company said machine maintenance. We have one guy that does machine maintenance, and he has a tool case that we have to replace every year. Total cost there is $22,000. So they said that's $22,000 that rolls up into unit cost, and then electricity is X cost.
Yeah.
So it'll take the total unit cost and then see how many gallons there are, and it divides that total unit cost by the gallons, and then okay, every time you
So it's
create a new gallon, it's going to cost X amount.
So 2 divided by 3 is which ends up with your baseline cost, right?
Step two.
Yeah, step 2 divided by 3. So
Yep.
unit divided by gallons equals your actual cost on
Yeah.
that product.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you've got to keep in mind, these overhead costs are fixed, so the calculations you're doing here are not going to match the next period. The next period you have to redo this. This is simply for analyzing the period you're coming out or past periods,
Okay.
because your overhead costs are going to remain the same, and you may have produced a ton more, so your unit cost may be completely the same, but you had double the number of gallons. Your
So
unit
your-
cost per gallon just cut in half.
And this is just overhead that we're figuring out. So
Just overhead.
so yeah, I get it.
And then the signing cost is just what we're talking about here. You're taking the unit and dividing by the gallons.
So the whole promise of doing this entire thing is just figuring out overhead per unit.
Yeah. And if
Yes.
you're- And if you're able to make more gallons on the number of units, like you just said, your overhead costs will go down, and you can either lower your price or make better margins.
Yeah.
on the product.
And the example they used, the ice cream company had a couple products that they thought were pretty profitable off of the standard sales technique, because how they did that is they simply said, here's the number of sales for this ice cream flavor and the cost we're selling it for, and they said, here's the revenue.